Good evening, everybody. Late night gang unite. Dr. Sam's is working late tonight. I know that many of you in the class are also working late tonight, so I am with you. I'm with you in spirit tonight. But I'm working late, but don't worry. I actually do have some type of work-life balance. I actually do other things besides teach. So I'm gonna shoot this video, upload it, and then I am heading home before I have to be back early in the morning. But I realized that tomorrow's our last day of class. We've had to sort of push up the schedule a little bit. With the amount of honors contract students that we have, there's a real good chance I would have to rush through this lecture tomorrow. This is a really important lecture I don't want to rush through. My honors contracts presentations are supposed to go around 5 minutes or so, but what's been happening is they've been going in around 15, 20 minutes or so. And so I want to give those students a chance to talk about the amazing work they've been doing. But then after they talk about that work, then actually be able to chat about topics that are important to us as a class as a whole. A good thing about recording this is because it's recorded, anybody can view it whenever they need to view it. Because it's recorded, anybody can look at it whenever the time is that they want to look at it. We don't know what people are dealing with. There's quite a few of you who have emailed me and spoken to me and talked to me after class, and there are loved ones that you are thinking of because they have either attempted a suicide or they completed a suicide. And so it's a sensitive topic, and it's one that I try to deliver with care. I don't want to feel like we have to rush through this topic tomorrow, but we are ending class a little bit early, and so I wanted to give this its due. So I wanted to record a full video, then upload this video, and then this video will be here for you whenever you need. Hopefully, just like me. So, Chapter 17, suicide. Let's get into it. Uh, I don't know how long we'll go. If I go on a rant or something, or if things get long, hopefully we're looking at a good 35, 40 minutes or so. So we think about suicide. And if I were to say, what's an image that describes suicide? One on your screen might be one we think of. An image, firearm, clearly in the pit of despair, clearly dealing with some very significant emotional disturbance, trying to consider if this is the end of the road. Should the person make a decision that if they were to make this decision, they wouldn't be able to come back from? So it's a very serious topic. It's a very serious occurrence. It happens more than we know. And dare I say, there's a cultural component to it. Watching this video, or if you're in the sound of my voice, how many of y'all know that life in the United States push you to the brink? It'll push you far. And for some individuals, there's not a real pathway to return from that. So when we think about suicide, we think about this image here. What are some of the things that it evokes in you? One of the things that's really clear is that the person is alone, by themselves, isolated, and dealing with something that there's a great possibility other people aren't even aware of. We see this image here. The person could have been in a depressive state for weeks on end before getting to this point. Or the thing that challenges us, and I think that this is one of the more difficult things. This could be an individual who just got home from a party, entertaining people, making people laugh, making people feel valued, making people feel loved, making people feel seen. Now is at home by herself, and this is the moment that she has a decision to make. So before we get into anything, you are taking notes on this. Before we get into anything, the thing that's important to note is that suicide is dynamic, and it doesn't look the same. It doesn't present always in the way we think it will. We're oftentimes very stunned that someone was a comedian or an entertainer. They made people happy, and then something happened, and they made a decision that shocked us all. So it oftentimes does not present in the way that we think it will. So what is suicide? An individual intentionally acts to cause his or her own death. It's not always easy to determine what the intentionality was behind it. Oftentimes we don't know. When we talk about intentionality, sometimes we think a person committed suicide, surely they left a note for us, tell us what happened. And you'd be quite shocked at the amount of people who don't leave notes. Suicidal behavior often turns out to be particularly ambiguous and ambivalent. So, what does that mean? Well, it wasn't always clear just from interacting with the person that they were going to commit suicide. It wasn't always clear from talking to the person this is what they were thinking about. And it wasn't clear that this is if they have been thinking about this at length or for some time, and we don't always know when the first thought arose that the person had, which is the answer to my problems is suicide. You could be talking to someone who appears to be perfectly happy, perfectly typically going about their life, but they're having these thoughts here that they should terminate their own life. It's difficulties in recognizing someone's actual intentions may contribute to our failing to recognize suicidal behavior when confronted by it. If you need to make this simple for you, right? We want to make this more in layman's terms. What does this mean? Oftentimes, it's not until after the person has completed the suicide where we go back and we say, aha, that's what that thing they were talking about, that's what that meant. How they were acting, what they said, what they didn't said, what the thing that they did. Now I'm putting it together. So what does this mean? In hindsight, we can see the signals, but in the moment when the person is expressing themselves, we don't think about it. A good example might be Anthony Bourdain, one of my favorite celebrities. Spent a lot of his time encouraging people to travel, to get outside of their bubble, to see the rest of the world. It's not until after he committed the act that people started to go through some of his old shows and episodes on CNN, and he would say these things that in the moment you just kind of didn't really think about. So, like in one of the episodes of one of his travels, he said something along the lines of that he oftentimes feels this darkness deep inside of him that he can't escape. And the way that he said it was much more poetic than I just did. But you heard it and you thought he's talking about some adventure he had and how this food he's eating made him feel alive. And it's not until later he commits suicide about 1 or 2 years later, and you're like, he was actually really dealing with some stuff. And so I think it's really difficult for us because with suicide, it's not until after the act is over that we put together what was going on, what was happening. In the United States, so it's the 10th leading cause of death. More deaths from suicide than homicide and HIV combined. Nearly as many suicide deaths as deaths from motor vehicle accidents, MVAs, and it's the 13th leading cause of death among veterans. Side note, or caveat, or footnote, whichever one you need for your notes, the second leading cause among veterans under the age of 45. I want to pause for a second. I'm going to try to keep this as unpolitical as I can, to the extent that I can. This is not really about Team Red or Team Blue. But what's happening right now is we're seeing veteran services being cut. We're seeing uh, many government services designed to help the VA and help veterans. We're seeing that being assigned the classification governmental waste. Turns out these services are actually very necessary. 13th leading cause overall amongst veterans, and the second leading cause amongst veterans under the age of 45. These are service people who served our country. They came back. They are dealing with things like such as PTSD, dealing with things such as disabilities. They have to adjust back to civilian life. Many of our homeless veterans, many of our veterans are homeless on the streets with no services. We don't treat our veterans well. And this is something that's very, you can probably tell I'm very passionate about. We don't treat our veterans well. And then because of that treatment and the things that they have gone through, where they're isolated and alone and dealing with the structural failures of society, what do we have? These high rates of suicide, which is, in my estimation, completely and totally preventable. So, how often does suicide take place, and what are the patterns that we see? Patterns of suicidal behavior. Person commits suicide every 11.9 minutes. By the time I finish this lecture, several people will have completed suicide. Just think about that for a second. By the time you finish watching this, several people will have completed the act. One elderly person completes the act about every 66 minutes. So if I run long, if I start running my mouth and can't stop, which I do sometimes, the elderly individual would have done this. One young person, 54 to 24 years of age, kills themselves about every 96 minutes. Suicide rates are highest amongst divorced, separated, and widowed. Uh, uh, One of the most dangerous times for men is immediately after separation. So divorce, separation, and widowhood, dangerous life crises. Remember, we just spoke about life crises some weeks ago. Life crises, these major things that happen that change our trajectory. An estimated 25 attempts for every completed. So that was over 1 million in 2015. Each completed suicide creates major life disruption for at least six other people. So more than 250,000 people's in the last few years alone. Suicide and sexuality. 1.8 million LGBTQIA plus individuals consider suicide per year. One LGBTQIA plus attempts suicide every 45 seconds. That's an absolutely terrible stat. Both of those are terrible stats. But that is an absolutely terrible stat. And right now, we are in a political climate that is seeking to erase LGBTQIA plus identity. And is also seeking to demonize and scapegoat LGBTQIA plus individuals. The night of the election last year, as the results were coming in, It said it was the highest amount of calls to the LGBTQIA plus suicide hotline ever because they knew they were up against. Today, Wednesday, it came out that the current administration is now, I think they're either going to, or they're attempting to, or they already have, planning to shut down the LGBTQIA plus suicide hotline. I don't know how much more troubled I can be. In my soul, my heart of hearts, I'm extremely troubled by this and what this means for the future of of our country with respect to LGBTQA plus individuals and the lack of respect, care, and compassion that we give individuals. I'm very worried about that. 48% of bisexual youth considered suicide, with 27% actually attempting it. Indigenous youth who are two-spirit LGBTQA plus report highest level of suicide attempts 2.5 times more likely. I'm not going to go on a rant because I don't want to do that. I'm not going to go on one of my rants. But I just want to say this. People have got to understand you can't erase people's identity because you don't like their identity. Two-spirit individuals have existed long before America was colonized through use of the Bible. Those people do not stop existing because other individuals wish to proselytize. Two-spirit individuals do not stop existing. They exist. They've always existed. People don't understand this. Individuals who identify as transsexual, guess what? They have always existed as well. So we're seeing in our culture that the culture to move in such a way as sexuality, a non-heteronormative sexuality, is a driver of suicide attempts and completions in this population. Black trans youth, 59% seriously considered it, of 26% actually attempting it. Transsexual youth are 2.4 times more likely to attempt suicide. Having accepting adults is important. What does that mean? What it takes is accepting adults, parents, guardians, educators, having people who accept you for your identity as it is greatly reduces the amount of suicides in this population. Young Native Americans, age 54 or 24, are killing themselves at a rate of 4 to 6 times the national average, with suicide being the ninth leading cause of death amongst American Indian and American Native people. Every 2.5 days, someone on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation attempts suicide. Why does that happen? Turns out generational trauma is real. Generational trauma is a big thing. Turns out seeing 99% of your population wiped out is traumatic and it leads to heavy suicide attempts. It also leads to something that we don't have time to talk about in this particular lecture, in this particular class. It also leads to heavy substance use, in particular to this population, alcoholism. So we see large amounts of deaths due to motor vehicle accidents, homicides, manslaughter, cirrhosis of the liver. All these are an after effect of the use of alcohol. So there's a cultural component here I mean, think about. By gender. So men are more successful than women. However, women attempt it more frequently than men. Uh, that actually makes some sense if you think about it. Men tend to use more violent methods. So men tend to use things like guns and hanging. Women also use hanging, but they also tend to use things like overdosing on medications. If you overdose on medication, there's a time interval where I can still save you. But if you uh, use a firearm on your head, then the damage is likely to be catastrophic. So firearms were used both by men and women. Poisoning was the second most common means used by women as well too. So firearms used were the main instruments used by both. Poisoning was also most common means used by women. So that's why they tend to survive a little bit more. But also, this also speaks to an issue that the United States has, which is the proliferation of guns. We said this earlier, say it again. There's enough guns right now for every American citizen to own two. And we are swimming in the sea of guns. So that's what's happening there. So we would expect to see these increases in things like homicides and suicides. Hanging was second most common means used by men also as well. So hanging and hanging and firearms, the two most common forms that we see. The age group amongst young people, age 15 to 24, suicide was the second leading cause of death. Death rates for suicide increased from adolescence through early and middle adulthood and declined a bit around 55 years of age, but began to rise again at 70. If you took a class in developmental psychology, and I know that you had better taken that class with me, if you took that class in developmental psychology, this makes some sense for you, all right? Adolescence through early and middle adulthood, what's going on? You're making your way through middle school, high school, your peer groups are changing. You're dealing with bullying, especially now in this online environment, online bullying, right? Well, one of the absolute worst things for you, one of the absolute worst social media sites for adolescents and especially adolescent girls, one of the worst social media sites, Instagram. They need to get rid of Instagram. And I'm saying that as somebody who uses Instagram. Many of you follow me on there. But Instagram is a terrible site for adolescents. All this comparison, all this ideas of beauty standards, all these curated feeds to pick a life that doesn't really exist, all that leads to suicide. But then suicide risk declines around 55. Why? You should hopefully be financially stable, your family is together, you're well in your job, your career is doing great, things are okay. And then they begin to rise again at 75. What's happening at 75? Cognitive declines, physical declines, so problems with our bodies, uh, uh, chronic illnesses are taking place. So we're dealing with things that we can't ever fully recover from. And then at 75, a lot of our loved ones have already passed away. So loss, regret, isolation. So that time period, uh, 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 needing someone else to help me with things such as medication. So that time period is very difficult. So we see that increase there too. Suicide rates are highest amongst 45s, 55 years old, 85 and older. Why would they be high there? What are people dealing with 45 to 55 years old? Well, so I'm 45. So uh, I have some idea what people are dealing with, right? Things such as the economy, things such as loss, things such as divorce, things such as problems on the job, illness, all these other things are going on. That 45 to 55-year period, it's a doozy. It's a big one. And you're heading towards your golden years. You're heading towards being 60. So, so there's a lot of things that are going on in that period. Caucasian Americans complete over 90% of all suicides. African Americans complete about 2,504 deaths by suicide. Suicide highly correlated to perceived discrimination over one's lifetime. What is perceived discrimination? Perceived discrimination, a fancy way of is a fancy way of saying uh, this idea that I'm experiencing racism and discrimination again. I am experiencing it again. I'm going through it again. And, doggone it, I'm in my 50s and I'm still experiencing racism. And I've been experiencing it since my 20s, since I was an adolescent. A lifetime of experiencing discrimination, racism, and it feels like you're going, like someone says a comment to you, and you're like last night, someone was talking, and I know that the person meant no harm, but person said something like, "You speak so well. You're so articulate." And if you're coming from a minoritized background, you can understand what the problem could be with someone saying that something like that to you. And so this idea that I'm going through another microaggression, I'm going through another problem, I'm going through something else. I've been here. I got skipped over this promotion that I should have gotten. I work harder than everybody else. So this idea of perceived discrimination actually ups the risk for suicide. I forgot to say, one of the highest numbers, fastest growing numbers of demographics that are experiencing suicide attempts and completions, African American females. So there's a gender, race, main effect, and interaction going on there. Hispanic Americans completed 3,003 deaths by suicide. I I didn't get a chance to do it before this lecture, but I think I would be very interested to see rates of suicide amongst Hispanic Americans in the last 3 months. I'd be very interested to see what that looks like. Asian Americans becoming the highest group attempting suicides. This is very recent. from 2020 onward. What happened in 2020? There was a pandemic that Asian Americans were scapegoated for. And so we've seen both an increase in the number of attempted suicides. We've also seen, and I will talk about this more in another lecture, we've also seen increase in the number of Asian individuals owning firearms for protection. And then Native Americans comprise 25% of force. One out of every four completed suicides aged 10 to 25 was Native American. Think about this for a second. An 11-year-old Native American child completing suicide. The highest rates occur in the mountain region, lowest rates in the middle Atlantic and New England. That actually makes some sense, right? In the mountain region, it's really far to get to another person, really far to get to mental health services, physical health services. So that makes some sense. Uh, in the middle Atlantic, New England areas, you can get to help really quickly. You can have services really quickly. Your neighbor's right there. So that makes some sense. Largest numbers took place in the South Atlantic, smallest in the New England. Alaska, Wyoming, Montana have the highest. DC, New York, New Jersey have the lowest. So the risk is reduced by being in these more urban areas. So three elements of suicidal behavior. We call these the three H's. Triple H. The first one, haplessness. Person just is unlucky in life, ill-fated. If a bad thing can happen, it happens to that person, it happens tenfold. So the person goes through life feeling like they're unlucky. There's helplessness. No one is coming to help me. No one's coming to save me. And then hopelessness. Hopelessness, there's no way out of the situation. The situation will never get better. And then there's the three main components plus the triggering process. The three main components, inimicality, perturbation, constriction. So, inimicality, you have to acting against one's own best interest. Some folks will, at least folks who think that they're really strong and tough and that, we know things, we're men, we're alpha, all this kind of stuff, right? Well, if somebody commits suicide, they must be weak. That's just silly. Silly. It's uninformed. Oftentimes, a person who commits suicide is actually quite strong because they have to overcome their natural human drives to live. So you have to act against your own best self-interest, which is to live, to commit the act. You have to be really strong to go against your drive to live. Perturbation, increased psychological disturbance, depression, anxiety, insomnia, problems eating, constriction, tunnel vision, either or. So person becomes so hyper fixated on I can't get out of the problem that they fail to see other solutions to getting out of the problem. So hyper fixating, tunnel vision. Either I can solve this right now in this moment, or I'm not going to be here anymore. And then cessation, the idea of resolving the pain of isolation and disturbance by simply ending it or being out of it. So the person wants to get out of the pain and says, I'm going to get out of this pain and I'm going to do it by getting out of this life. Commonalities of suicide. First, to seek a solution, to stop consciousness. I don't want to be stopping consciousness. I don't want to be aware of the pain that I'm going through right now. And this pain is unbearable psychological pain. Frustrated psychological needs. What is frustration? Frustration in practice means I keep coming close to my goal, and every time I come close to it, something happens and I'm farther away from it. Okay? I keep coming close to paying off this credit card, and then when I get close, I'm within $1,000 of paying this thing off. Boom, something happens. Now I owe $5,000 again. Can't ever get to a zero balance. Every time I try to solve this goal of getting into this program, something happens and I'm not able to get into it. So when frustration happens, the goal is in sight and you can almost reach it. You can almost reach out and reach it, and then something happens to snatch it away from you. A lifetime of that is going to wear you down. Hopelessness and helplessness we've spoken of. And then common cognitive state is ambivalence. Person kind of gets to a place where it's like, I don't really care anymore. Just, I don't really care if I'm here or not anymore. I just don't care. It's just if I make it, then fine. If I don't, then because the pain, psychological pain, is so much. And so we spoke about constriction, so being hyper focused on one aspect of the problem to the exclusion of other aspects. So you're focused solely on the problem, and it's hard to focus on other solutions that you could have to it. And then escape. Person wants to get out of this. They want to escape the problem. The common interpersonal act in suicide is communication of intention. What does this mean? We may have missed it. We may have missed it. But at some point, there were some signs that the person was thinking about doing this thing. At some point, there were some signs the person was considering ending their life. We may have missed it. We may have blew it off as a joke. But the signs were there. And then the common pattern is consistency of lifelong styles. What does this mean? If I consistently am used to a certain way of solving problems, then I stick to that. I'm used to being able to fight my way out of issues, to fight my way out of problems, and I'm used to the problem never truly being solved. The problem just keeps on coming no matter what I do. And this problem I'm dealing with now, no matter what I do, it's just not going to go away. I'm sick of it. I want to take a little bit of an aside as well. Suicide is oftentimes used as a tool. So, terrorism and self-destructive acts, groups that get members to engage in a suicidal murderous act, so they build up motivation to overcome ambivalence and perform the act. We think about terrorists from the from 9/11. They would meet together consistently, and when you're in a group, guess what? It's hard to leave the group, and the group builds you up over and over again to get ready to do the act. So even if you change your mind, you know what keeps you there? This thing that you learned in social psychology, conformity. You conform to the group standard. So they must be right. I need to toughen up and be brave and do what the group said, like I said I would. So they provide group pressure to stick to the mission. They get a direct commitment from the individual to perform the act, have identified himself or herself before the group and to others as a living martyr. You have to do this here because this is bigger than yourself. It doesn't matter if you die, you're going to become a symbol, a legend, a martyr for the cause. And that is enough to get people to do the act. There's also suicide as protest. We think about Buddhist monks in Tibet who perform self-immolation. Self-immolation, person is surrounded by a group of people. They're in prayer. They're set on fire. And then in that fire, they don't scream. They don't show any outward signs of pain. And then the person essentially burns to a crisp in front of our eyes and then just falls right over. It sends a very powerful message on the strength of the human mind and body. And what's the message? My mind and my body is stronger than what this government's trying to do. So the government is seen as acting unjustly, and the self-immolation is an act to say we are stronger than you. Suicide survivors have more issues to deal with than other survivors and must cope with the four tasks. Task anyone has after the death of someone to whom they've been close to. So if anybody who we're close to dies, we have to do certain things. But when it's a suicide, it becomes much more harder. Tasks related to a death that arises from some cause other than a natural one, often perceived to have been avoidable. This right here is hard for us because one of the things we always do is we say, I should have been able to figure out this person was going to do this. I should have been able to catch this. And we weren't. So oftentimes we blame ourselves. What's going on? This could have been avoidable. Why didn't the person talk to me? Why didn't I know they needed someone to talk to? And then tasks associated with a sudden death. For any sudden death, it'll be hard for us. It's hard if a loved one goes walking somewhere and has an accident, dies in a car accident, gets shot, dies in a robbery gone wrong. A loved one dies of a heart attack. These are all very shocking to us. But there's something about suicide that makes it different because the person performed the act on themselves. We have a hard time with that. And then the suicidal nature of the death. The fact that the person did in fact take their own life. For everything that was going on, they took their own life, and we have a hard time conceiving how a person could do such a thing. Role of the family in the mourning process. Families are able to form a healing alliance or be able to cope with the after effects of suicide. In other words, families who are able to talk openly about the suicide and uplift one another. They tend to do better than families where everyone's, after a traumatic and sometimes violent death like a suicide. What do we see happen in families? We see people go off in their own direction, do their own thing. The inability to communicate with each other, assigning guilt or blame, resulting in the breakdown or even the severing of relationships, complicate the mourning process. It's hard to get along with somebody who says it's your fault they committed suicide. How come you didn't know they were going to do that? People deal and they grieve by blaming other people. The interaction of survivors with persons outside of the family may also affect mourning. These are a lot of words here, but the big picture is they might experience something called disenfranchised grief. We didn't talk about disenfranchised grief that much this semester. Disenfranchised grief is grief that has no place to go. We might even think of it as grief that is unrecognized. So, for example, let's say that your loved one is on death row for the murder of someone and then is put to death. There's no public procedure for mourning your loved one who's been put to death. In fact, if you do so publicly, you might suffer some social consequences. We also don't have a procedure for how to mourn somebody who dies due to suicide. The culture largely considers suicide to be a taboo. So, how do we mourn our loved one who has done the act? So, fewer social rules exist to guide people in these situations. Those that do constrain behavior more than the rules governing other mourning situations. In other words, How do you deal with it? Don't talk about it. Well, that's not really helpful. My loved one committed suicide, and you don't want to talk with me about it? No, we don't. And that's difficult for us. Struggle with that. Survivors may withdraw and experience the stigmatization associated with suicide intraphysically as much as socially, right? Intraphysically, you might think of it, or intrapsychically. Intrapsychically. What does that mean? Mentally, as much as socially. So we withdraw into our own heads, to our own minds, trying to figure out what happened. What could we have done? What could have changed the situation? Why didn't they tell us? And then finally, there are cluster or copycat suicides. So this is when it happens more than we would uh, ascribe to chance. This occurs frequently with 15, 19-year-olds, 20, 24-year-olds, and maybe 45 to 64-year-olds. So you see people committing suicide, and then you get the idea to do it, and then you do it. The 15 to 24-year-olds make some sense if you think about it as well, because of the nature of the world that we're in right now with social media and people broadcasting that they're going to commit suicide later than doing so. So the nature of the world that we're in promotes that. However, studies show that adolescents who have completed suicide following early suicides share other attributes. So there's other things going on in that population. Substance abuse, mental illness, losing a significant romantic interest, witnessing violence themselves, right? We've had a lot of cases of folks seeing violence and as a result of seeing that violence, choosing to end their own lives. Attending more schools, so moving around, meaning you don't make a lot of concrete friendships if you're offended. Having more than two adults who served as adults, as parents. What does that mean? Two safe and secure individuals come into your life and then they leave. And then two more safe and secure individuals come into your life and then they leave too. So people are coming in and out, no one's staying, and you begin to learn that relationships are all transitory. So all of these things work together and add to that. So I tried to get this done as quick as I could in a way that makes sense because this is important to talk about. If you are someone who's struggling, we say this all the time, but we still don't say it enough. If you're someone who's struggling, then please seek services. Please talk to someone. Please talk to me. Most of you have no problem doing that. Talk to me. Don't go through anything alone and don't make a decision that's permanent. And if you're somebody who's living in the aftermath of a loved one completing the act, talk to me about that as well. Also seek services. Suicides are very hard to process. They're very hard to grieve. They're very hard to go through and make sense of alone on your own. So I am here to help and assist should you ever need. And I know the university is as well. All right. I know that many of you are still up, beginning work and doing things. So I bid you adieu till our next video. I'll see you in class in the future. You're in my mind. You're in my thoughts. All of you matter greatly. You're all going to do amazing things, but also you're already amazing just as you are. And I want you to know that. However you are, whoever you are, whatever you ascribe to be, whatever you plan to be, what I want you to know is that is already enough. You're already enough, and you're already worthy of love and comfort and understanding and compassion. You're already valuable. And that's important for me that you know that. All right. I will talk to you all later.